The February wind cut through Boston like a blade, rattling the windows of the cramped tenement room where Catherine Morrison kept vigil beside her dying mother. The oil lamp flickered, casting shadows that danced across the peeling wallpaper, across the sunken face of the woman who had once been so strong, so vital. Now she was little more than bones and shallow breath, her chest rising and falling with the terrible rhythm of tuberculosis. Catherine pressed a cool cloth to her mother's forehead, trying not to let the fear show on her face. In the next room, she could hear Benjamin and Grace whispering to each other, their voices tight with the kind of worry that children should never have to carry. They were trying to be brave. They were trying to be quiet. But Catherine knew they understood what was coming. They had watched their father die 5 years ago. They knew what death looked like when it settled into a house and refused to leave. Her mother's eyes fluttered open, pale and watery, but still holding that fierce determination that had carried their family through so many dark times. Her hand, thin as paper, reached out and grasped Catherine's wrist with surprising strength. "Catherine," the voice was barely a whisper, rough as gravel. "The letter, top drawer." Catherine's heart squeezed. She knew which letter. She had seen her mother writing it 3 months ago, hunched over the kitchen table late at night when she thought no one was watching. Catherine had asked about it once, and her mother had simply smiled and said it was insurance, a way to make sure the children would be safe no matter what happened. "Mama, don't. You're going to get better. We'll figure something out." But her mother's grip only tightened. "Listen to me. I wrote to Reverend Hayes in Wyoming. He runs a service for men out west who need wives. Good men, honest men who can provide what I never could." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. A mail-order bride service. Her mother had essentially sold her to a stranger. "There's a man," her mother continued, each word costing her precious breath. "Jackson Brennan, a rancher, widower. He agreed to take you as his wife. He agreed to take Benjamin and Grace too. It's all arranged, Catherine. You leave in 2 weeks." "Mama, I can't. I can't just leave you and go marry some stranger out west. I'll be gone in 2 weeks." The brutal honesty of it silenced any argument Catherine might have made. "The landlord gave us notice. 3 days after the 1st of March, you'll be on the street. This is your only chance." Their only chance. Catherine wanted to scream. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to rage against the unfairness of a world that would force such impossible choices on people who had done nothing to deserve such cruelty. But when she looked into her mother's eyes, she saw the truth there. This was love. Desperate, terrible, sacrificial love. "The letter," her mother whispered again. "Read it. He seems like a good man." Catherine's hands shook as she opened the drawer and pulled out the envelope. Inside were 2 letters. One from Reverend Hayes, written in neat, careful script, explaining the arrangement. The other was from Jackson Brennan himself. 4 lines. That was all. The handwriting was rough, unpracticed, the letters formed by a hand more accustomed to holding reins than a pen. "I am a rancher in Wyoming Territory. I have a home and can provide. I will honor the arrangement. Jackson Brennan." That was it. No poetry, no promises of affection, just the bare facts delivered with all the warmth of a business contract. Catherine folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. She looked at her mother, at the hope and fear warring in those dying eyes, and she made the only choice she could make. "All right, Mama, I'll go." Her mother's face relaxed, some of the tension bleeding out of her thin frame. "Thank you, my darling girl. Thank you." 3 days later, Catherine Morrison buried her mother in a pauper's grave in the frozen ground of a Boston cemetery. The service was brief. Only she, Benjamin, and Grace attended, along with the priest who rushed through the prayers like a man late for an appointment. No one else came. Their father's family had disowned him when he married beneath his station. Their mother's family had scattered to the winds years ago. They were alone. That night in the cold tenement room that would cease to be theirs in 48 hours, Catherine sat the children down and explained as gently as she could. They were going west, to Wyoming, to start a new life with a man who had agreed to help them. Benjamin, 10 years old and already trying to be the man of the family, nodded solemnly. "Is he going to be our new father?" Catherine hesitated. She had been asking herself the same question. "He's a good man who's offering us a home. That's all we need to know right now." Grace, 8 years old, with eyes too old for her years, studied Catherine's face. "Are you scared?" Catherine wanted to lie. She wanted to tell her little sister that everything would be fine, that she had it all figured out, that there was nothing to fear. But Grace deserved better than lies. Yes, sweetheart, I'm scared, but we're going to be brave together, all three of us. The next morning, Catherine counted the money they had left. $12.37. It would barely enough for 3 train tickets to Wyoming if they traveled in the lowest class cars. There would be nothing left for food on the journey, nothing left for emergencies. They would arrive with literally nothing but the clothes on their backs and the 2 carpet bags that held everything they owned. She bought the tickets. The train station was chaos. People rushing in every direction, vendors shouting about hot coffee and meat pies, porters hauling luggage, and beneath it all, the massive hiss and rumble of the locomotives. Catherine held tight to Grace's hand, while Benjamin struggled with their bags, refusing her help, because he was the man now, and men carried the heavy things. They found their car at the very back of the train, third class. The seats were hard wooden benches, and the air already smelled of unwashed bodies and desperation. This was where the poor traveled, the desperate, the people with nowhere else to go. As Catherine helped Grace into a seat by the window and stowed their bags, she noticed a man watching them from across the aisle. He was middle-aged, somewhere in his 50s, with a face that might have been kind once but now held something calculating, something cold. When he caught her looking, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Catherine turned away, pulling Benjamin and Grace closer. The train lurched into motion with a screech of metal and a belch of steam. Boston began to slide past the windows, growing smaller and more distant with every passing moment. Grace pressed her face to the glass, watching the only city she had ever known disappear into the industrial haze. "Will we ever come back?" she asked quietly. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe someday." But Catherine knew the truth. They were leaving forever. Whatever waited for them in Wyoming, for better or worse, that would be their life now. The journey took 3 days. 3 days of hard seats and restless sleep, of sharing stale bread and cheese that Catherine had packed, of watching the landscape transform from crowded cities to endless plains. Benjamin tried to be helpful, fetching water when the train stopped, keeping Grace entertained with stories. Grace drew pictures on scraps of paper, her small hands creating entire worlds with just a pencil stub. And all the while, the man across the aisle watched. On the second night, when Catherine had finally managed to doze off with Grace's head on her shoulder and Benjamin curled up on the seat beside her, she woke to the sensation of someone going through her bag. Her eyes snapped open. The man from across the aisle was leaning over, his hand in her carpet bag, rifling through their meager possessions. Catherine's hands shot out and grabbed his wrist. "What do you think you're doing?" The man jerked back, but his face showed no shame, no embarrassment at being caught. Instead, he smiled that cold smile again. "Just admiring your determination, Miss Morrison. It takes courage to travel so far with 2 children and no husband to protect you." Her blood ran cold. "How do you know my name?" "I know a great deal about you, Catherine. I know your mother just died. I know you're traveling to Wyoming to marry a rancher named Jackson Brennan. I know you're bringing in your brother and sister with you." Catherine's mind raced. She glanced at Benjamin and Grace, relieved to see they were still sleeping. "Who are you?" "My name is Silas Morrison. I'm your uncle, your mother's brother." The words landed like stones in deep water. Catherine had heard the name before, years ago, whispered in angry tones between her parents. Silas Morrison, the brother who had abandoned the family, who had refused to help when times were hard, who had vanished to seek his fortune and never looked back. "I don't believe you. My mother never mentioned having a brother who cared enough to check on his family." Silas's smile faded slightly. "Your mother and I had our differences, but family is family, Catherine. And those children belong with blood relatives, not with some stranger out west. They're staying with me. We're family." "Are you—" Silas leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're not their mother, Catherine. You're their sister, a 22-year-old woman with no prospects, no money, about to enter into a marriage with a man you've never met. Do you really think that's what's best for them?" Catherine wanted to slap him. She wanted to scream that she had done everything for Benjamin and Grace, that she had sacrificed her own future to keep them together, that love meant more than blood. But the other passengers were starting to stir, and the last thing she needed was to draw attention. Stay away from us, she said quietly, her voice hard as iron. Whatever you want, whatever scheme you're planning, leave us alone. Silas sat back with a shrug. I'm just concerned for my niece and nephew, that's all. But you'll see reason eventually. When that cowboy realizes what a burden you are when he sends you packing, you'll wish you had family to turn to. He said nothing more, but Catherine noticed he had palmed something from her bag. When she checked later, she discovered it was the letter with Jackson Brennan's address. Silas now knew exactly where they were going. She didn't sleep for the rest of the journey. When the train finally pulled into the station at Redemption Creek, Wyoming, Catherine's first thought was that they had made a terrible mistake. The town was barely more than a collection of wooden buildings scattered along a dirt road. There was a general store, a saloon, a church with a modest steeple, and a handful of houses. Everything looked weathered and worn, beaten down by wind and sun and the harshness of frontier life. The sky was enormous here, bigger than Catherine had ever imagined possible, stretching from horizon to horizon without a single tree to break its dominance. The wind was different, too sharp and cold, even though it was only early March. It carried the smell of dust and distance of a land so vast and empty that human concerns seemed trivial in comparison. Grace clutched Catherine's hand tighter. It's so big, she whispered. Benjamin stood very still, trying to look brave, but Catherine could see the fear in the set of his shoulders. Come on, Catherine said, forcing confidence into her voice. Let's find Reverend Hayes. The church was easy to locate, being one of the few buildings with any claim to grandeur. Catherine led the children up the wooden steps and knocked on the door. For a long moment, there was no answer, and she felt panic beginning to rise in her chest. What if Reverend Hayes wasn't here? What if he had forgotten about them? What if this whole thing had been some cruel mistake? Then the door opened, and a man in his 50s with kind eyes and graying hair looked out at them. Yes, can I help you? Reverend Hayes, I'm Catherine Morrison. I believe you were expecting me. The Reverend's face went through a remarkable transformation. Surprise, confusion, then something that looked disturbingly like dismay. Miss Morrison, but I thought that is to say... He stopped, collected himself, and opened the door wider. Please come in. All of you. They entered a small but tidy office. Reverend Hayes gestured for them to sit, then stood by his desk, looking deeply uncomfortable. Catherine's stomach began to sink. Reverend, is something wrong? He sighed and pulled a piece of paper from his desk drawer. Miss Morrison, I received a telegram from Mr. Brennan 2 weeks ago. He asked me to cancel the arrangement. He said he had changed his mind about taking a wife. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Catherine heard them, understood them, but couldn't quite process what they meant. She had come all this way. She had brought Benjamin and Grace across the entire country. They'd had nothing left. No money, no home, no plan beyond this one desperate hope. There must be some mistake, she heard herself saying. We had an agreement. My mother arranged everything. I know, and I'm terribly sorry. I sent a telegram to Boston immediately, but it must have arrived after you had already left. Mr. Brennan was very clear. He doesn't want to go through with the marriage. Grace made a small sound, quickly stifled. Benjamin's face had gone very pale. Catherine felt the room tilting slightly, the edges of her vision going dark. She gripped the arm of the chair to steady herself. We have nowhere to go, she said quietly. The simple truth of it was devastating. Reverend Hayes, we have no money, no family except... She stopped, thinking of Silas on the train. We have no one. The Reverend's face creased with genuine sympathy. You can stay at the church tonight. We have a small room in the back. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. In the morning, I'll ride out to Mr. Brennan's ranch and speak with him. Perhaps I can convince him to at least meet with you to explain the situation. It was charity, and Catherine's pride burned at having to accept it. But pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Thank you, Reverend. We're grateful. That night, lying on a narrow cot in the back room of the church with Grace curled against her side and Benjamin on a pallet on the floor, Catherine stared at the ceiling and tried not to cry. She had failed. She had brought them all this way for nothing. Tomorrow, Reverend Hayes would speak to Jackson Brennan, and the cowboy would say no, and then what? Would they end up on the street? Would Silas appear with his legal claims and his cold smile tearing their family apart? She didn't sleep. She couldn't. All she could do was hold Grace close and listen to the wind howling outside, wondering if they would survive what was coming. Miles away in a ranch house at the edge of the territory, Jackson Brennan sat in the dark and stared at a photograph. The image was faded now, the edges worn from years of handling, but he could still make out every detail. Margaret, his wife, beautiful and laughing, her hand resting on the shoulder of their daughter Lily. 4 years old in this picture with Margaret's dark curls and his blue eyes. They had been dead for 5 years now. 5 years since the influenza swept through and took them both in the span of 6 terrible days. 5 years of living in this house alone, going through the motions of life without actually living, working the ranch because there was nothing else to do, nothing else to fill the hours between waking and sleeping. 2 months ago, in a moment of weakness, he had responded to Reverend's letter about the mail-order bride service. A widow from Boston with 2 young children looking for a fresh start. Something about the description had called to him. Maybe it was the loneliness finally breaking through. Maybe it was the hope, however faint, that he might find purpose again. He had written back agreeing to the arrangement. Then 2 weeks ago he had come to his senses. What had he been thinking? He couldn't replace Margaret. He couldn't betray her memory by bringing another woman into the home they had built together. He couldn't look at other children and not see Lily's ghost in every corner. He had sent the telegram canceling everything. But now, sitting in the darkness with only the photograph for company, he wondered if he had made a mistake. The house was so quiet, so empty. Sometimes he went days without speaking to another human being. The work kept his body occupied, but his mind was a wasteland of memories and regrets. A knock at the door startled him. He wasn't expecting visitors. No one came out here anymore. He had made sure of that, pushing away anyone who tried to reach him, anyone who tried to help. He opened the door to find Abigail Whitmore standing on his porch, wrapped in a heavy shawl against the cold. She was his nearest neighbor, living 3 miles south with her husband and their brood of children. She had been Margaret's closest friend. She was one of the few people who still tried to check on him. "Jack," she said, her breath misting in the cold air, "I just came from town. There's a blizzard coming. Big one. Could hit as soon as tomorrow morning. You need to get into town and stock up on supplies." He almost told her he had plenty of supplies. He almost closed the door and went back to his vigil with the photograph. But something in her expression stopped him. She looked worried. More worried than the weather alone warranted. "What else, Abigail?" She hesitated. "Reverend Hayes mentioned something. A woman and 2 children arrived on today's train. They're staying at the church. He said she's your mail-order bride, Jack. She came all this way and now she's stranded here with nowhere to go." Jack felt his chest tighten. "I sent a telegram. I canceled it." "She didn't get it. She's here now with 2 little ones and that storm's coming. The Reverend's going to ride out tomorrow to talk to you, but Jack, if that blizzard hits, it could be a week before anyone can travel. Those children—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Jack understood what she was saying. A woman and 2 children stranded in a frontier town with no money and no resources, facing a week-long blizzard. They could freeze. They could starve. They could die just like Margaret and Lily had died, while someone who could have helped stood by and did nothing. "I'll ride to town first thing in the morning," he said quietly. Abigail nodded, relief evident on her face. "Thank you, Jack. I know this isn't what you wanted, but it's the right thing to do, I know." After she left, Jack stood on the porch for a long time, looking out at the darkness. The wind was picking up, already carrying the smell of snow. By tomorrow, the world would be white and impassable. And somewhere in town, a woman he had never met was waiting for a man who had rejected her without even having the courage to do it face to face. He went back inside and looked at the photograph one more time. "I'm sorry, Margaret," he whispered. "I don't know what I'm doing, but I can't let them die." He set the photograph gently on the mantel and went to pack supplies for the trip to town. Morning came gray and cold, with clouds massing on the horizon like an army preparing for battle. Jack saddled his horse and rode toward Redemption Creek. His thoughts a tangled mess of guilt and obligation and something else he couldn't quite name. Dread, maybe. Or fear. Fear of what he might feel when he saw this woman and her children. Fear that they might somehow make him remember everything he had lost. Fear that they might make him want things he had no right to want anymore. The ride took an hour. By the time he reached the edge of town, the first snowflakes were beginning to fall, delicate and deceptive, the harbingers of the storm to come. He tied his horse outside the general store and went inside to buy supplies. Flour, coffee, salt, dried beans, matches. The essentials. The shopkeeper made conversation, but Jack barely heard him. His mind was on the church at the end of the street, on the woman and children waiting there, on the decision he was about to have to make. He was loading the last of the supplies onto his horse when Reverend Hayes found him. Jack, the Reverend, hurried across the street, his coat flapping in the rising wind. "Thank God you're here. Did Abigail tell you?" "She told me. Where are they?" "At the church. Jack, I need you to understand this woman didn't know you had canceled. She traveled all this way in good faith. She has 2 children with her, a boy and a girl, and they have nowhere else to go. The landlord in Boston turned them out after their mother died." Jack felt something twist in his chest. A mother dead. Children left alone. It was too familiar, too close to his own pain. "I need to see them," he said. They walked to the church together, the snow falling faster now, the wind beginning to howl. Inside, the small sanctuary was cold, despite the stove burning in the corner. And there, sitting on a bench near the front, were 3 people who would change Jack Brennan's life forever. The woman stood when she saw them enter. She was younger than he had expected, probably mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun and eyes that held a kind of fierce determination he recognized. She was thin, too thin, wearing a dress that had been mended more times than he could count. But she held herself with dignity, her shoulders back, her chin up, refusing to be diminished by circumstance. Behind her stood a boy, maybe 10 years old, trying to look brave and protective, despite his own obvious fear. And beside the boy was a little girl with wide eyes and a face so pale she looked like a ghost. Jack's breath caught. The girl was about the same age Lily had been, the same dark curls, the same delicate features. "Mr. Brennan," the woman said, her voice steady despite the tremor he could see in her hands. "I'm Catherine Morrison. I believe there's been a misunderstanding." He couldn't speak, couldn't move. All he could do was stare at that little girl and see his daughter's face superimposed over hers, see all the years Lily would never have, all the moments they would never share. "Jack," Reverend Hayes's voice seemed to come from very far away. The little girl shifted, moving closer to her sister, and the spell broke. This wasn't Lily. This was Grace Morrison, a living child who needed help, not a ghost from his past. "I sent a telegram," Jack managed. "I canceled the arrangement." Catherine's face remained calm, but he saw the flash of pain in her eyes quickly hidden. "The telegram must have arrived after we left Boston. We've been traveling for 3 days. We had no way of knowing." "I'm sorry, I should have written sooner." "What's done is done, Mr. Brennan. I don't wish to impose on you further. If you could simply point us toward a boarding house or hotel, we'll make our own arrangements." She was giving him an out, letting him walk away clean. And Jack knew he should take it. He should direct them to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, wish them well, and go back to his ranch and his solitary life and his memories. But then the little girl, Grace, coughed. It was a small sound, barely noticeable, but it triggered something in Jack's memory. Lily had coughed like that right before the fever took hold, right before the influenza stole her away. Outside, the wind was really howling now. Through the church windows, Jack could see the storm had grown worse while they were inside. Snow was falling in thick sheets, already starting to accumulate. This wasn't just a storm. This was a blizzard, the kind that buried houses and killed livestock and left people frozen in their tracks if they were foolish enough to be caught outside. He looked at Catherine Morrison, at her brother and sister, at their threadbare coats and worn shoes, and he knew what he had to do. Not because he wanted to. Not because it would heal his pain or honor Margaret's memory or make anything better. But because it was right. Because he was the only one who could help them, and if he turned away now, they might die. "There's a blizzard coming," he said. "It'll hit within the hour. You won't make it to a boarding house. The streets will be impassable." "We'll manage somehow." "No, you won't." His voice came out harsher than he intended. "Miss Morrison, I've lived through winters out here. This storm could last a week. You have no supplies, no shelter, and 2 children to protect. You won't survive. Then what do you suggest?" The question hung in the air between them. Jack saw Reverend Hayes watching him, saw the hope and fear warring in Catherine's eyes, saw the boy Benjamin standing ready to fight if necessary, saw little Grace shivering despite the stove's heat. "You'll come with me," he said, "to my ranch. It's 5 miles out, but we can make it if we leave now. You'll stay there until the storm passes. After that, he paused, not sure what came after. After that, we'll figure something out. Catherine studied his face for a long moment. He could see her weighing the options, calculating the risks, trying to decide if accepting help from a stranger was more dangerous than facing the storm alone. Finally, she nodded. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. We accept your offer. Good, get your things. We need to leave now. They had 2 carpet bags between the 3 of them. Everything they owned in the world, and it fit in 2 bags. Jack helped them gather their meager belongings and led them out into the storm. The world outside had transformed in the brief time they had been inside the church. Snow already covered the ground in a thick blanket, and the wind howled with a fury that stole breath from lungs. Visibility was dropping rapidly. Jack could barely see the buildings across the street. He lifted Grace onto his horse without asking permission, knowing the little girl wouldn't survive the walk. Catherine started to protest, but he cut her off. You and the boy can share the saddle. I'll walk and lead the horse. It's not far. But you'll freeze. I've worked cattle drives in storms that would make this look like a spring rain. I'll be fine. It was a lie, but a necessary one. The truth was that the cold bit through his coat within minutes, numbing his hands and face, making every step an effort. But he kept moving, one hand on the horse's reins, the other holding Grace steady, his head down against the wind. Behind him, he could hear Catherine and Benjamin, trying to stay upright in the saddle, could hear Grace's small whimpers of cold and fear. 5 miles had never seemed so far. The world had become nothing but white and wind and cold. The landscape erased, the horizon vanished. There was only the next step and the next and the next. His ranch appeared like a mirage through the snow. The barn first, then the house, solid and real and blessedly close. Jack led the horse straight to the porch and helped Catherine and Benjamin down. His hands were so numb he could barely feel his fingers. Inside, he managed through chattering teeth. Fire's still going. It should be warm. He handed Catherine the key, and she hurried the children inside. Jack took a moment to unsaddle the horse and lead it into the barn, making sure the animal had hay and water, before he allowed himself to seek shelter. When he finally stumbled through the door of his own house, Catherine already had the fire built up and was helping Grace out of her wet clothes. Benjamin stood nearby, looking lost and uncertain in the unfamiliar surroundings. Jack closed the door against the storm and leaned against it, his body shaking with cold and exhaustion. Catherine looked up, and for a moment their eyes met. Hers were filled with gratitude and something else. Maybe hope, maybe fear, maybe both. Thank you, she said softly. You saved our lives. Jack didn't know what to say to that. He had saved them, yes, but he had also brought them into his home, into the space he had shared with Margaret, into the life he had been trying to leave frozen and untouched. And now, everything was going to change. He could feel it in the air, in the way Grace looked at him with Lily's eyes, and the way Catherine stood in his kitchen like she belonged there. The spare room has 2 beds, he said, his voice rough. You and the children can sleep there. I'll bunk in the barn. Mr. Brennan, you can't sleep in the barn in this storm. I've done it before. I'll be fine. But even as he said it, he knew it was another lie. He wasn't fine. He hadn't been fine in 5 years. And having these strangers in his house, filling it with life and noise and need, was going to break something inside him that he had been carefully holding together. Catherine seemed to understand. She nodded slowly and didn't argue further. Then at least let me make you some coffee before you go, and some food. You must be frozen. He should refuse. He should go to the barn right now and put some distance between himself and this complicated situation. But the smell of coffee brewing and food cooking was too much to resist. It had been so long since anyone had cooked in this kitchen. So long since the house felt alive. He sat at the table while Catherine moved around his kitchen with surprising competence, finding what she needed, preparing a simple meal of salt pork and beans. Benjamin and Grace huddled by the fire, slowly warming up, slowly beginning to believe they were safe. When Catherine set a plate in front of him, Jack realized he was starving. He couldn't remember the last time he had eaten a proper meal. Probably yesterday morning, maybe the day before. Time had a way of blurring together when you lived alone. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. When they finished, Catherine cleared the dishes and then stood uncertainly, clearly not sure what came next. I should show you to your room, Jack said, standing. He led them down the short hallway to the spare room. It was small but clean with two narrow beds and a simple dresser. He had kept it ready for guests that never came more out of habit than any real hope that someone would visit. "It's not much," he said. "It's perfect," Catherine replied. "Mr. Brennan, we're truly grateful for your hospitality. I know this isn't what you wanted." "No," he agreed. "It's not, but it's what's right." He left them to settle in and went to gather his things for the barn. But as he reached for his coat, Catherine appeared in the hallway. "Mr. Brennan, please. You don't have to sleep in the barn. This is your home. We're the intruders here. You should keep your own bed." "I can't," he said simply. "I can't share a house with a young unmarried woman. It wouldn't be proper." "Then what do you propose we do? We can't stay here indefinitely, and we certainly can't leave in this storm." Jack looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. She was beautiful in a way he hadn't expected. Not the delicate beauty of Margaret, but something stronger, more resilient. The kind of beauty that came from surviving hard things and refusing to be broken by them. An idea was forming in his mind. A terrible, reckless idea that solved all the practical problems while creating a host of new ones. "There is one solution," he said slowly. "We could make it official. Get married, a real marriage, I mean, with papers and the reverend and everything legal." Catherine stared at him. "You just canceled our arrangement 2 weeks ago. Now you want to marry me?" "Not want. It's practical. If we're married, you can stay here without causing talk. The children will be provided for. After the storm, if you want to leave, we can get the marriage annulled. But at least it solves the immediate problem." "And what do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. Brennan?" He wanted to say nothing. He wanted to say he was doing it purely out of charity. But something made him tell the truth. Company, help running this place, maybe a reason to keep going. The honesty of it seemed to shake something loose in Catherine. She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her thinking it through, weighing the options. "If we do this," she said carefully, "I need to know what you expect from me, as your wife. Cooking, cleaning, help with the ranch work if you're able, that's all." Nothing else. He understood what she was asking. Separate rooms. This would be a marriage on paper only. I can't. You still love your wife." "I'll always love my wife." Catherine nodded slowly. "All right then. If you're sure about this, if you truly think it's the best solution, then I accept. Each. But I have one condition." "What's that?" "We tell Benjamin and Grace the truth, that this is an arrangement to help us all. I won't lie to them about why we're doing this." "Agreed." They stood there in the hallway, two strangers who had just agreed to bind their lives together, and Jack felt the weight of it settling over him like the snow settling over the land outside. This was madness. He knew it was madness, but he also knew it was the only way forward. The storm raged for 4 days. 4 days in which Jack and Catherine and the children lived in a strange kind of suspended reality, trapped together in the ranch house, while the world outside disappeared under snow. Jack slept in the barn as promised, though he came in for meals and to check that the fire stayed lit. Catherine cooked and cleaned and tried to keep Benjamin and Grace occupied. The children, for their part, seemed to adapt with the resilience of youth. Benjamin asked 100 questions about ranching and horse and life out west. Grace drew pictures and made up stories and slowly began to lose that haunted look that had been in her eyes since Boston. On the third day, Grace approached Jack shyly while he was sitting by the fire warming up after a trip to check on the livestock. "Mr. Brennan," she said, her voice small, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you going to be our papa now?" The question hit him like a fist to the chest. He looked at this little girl with her dark curls and hopeful eyes, and he saw Lily so clearly it hurt to breathe. I He didn't know how to answer. Catherine had said they would be honest with the children, but how did you explain to an 8-year-old that this was just a practical arrangement, not a real family? Catherine appeared from the kitchen, having clearly overheard. "Grace, remember what we talked about. Mr. Brennan is being very kind to help us. But this is different from having a papa." "But we're going to be a family, right?" That's what Catherine said. "We're going to live here and be safe." "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be safe." Grace seemed satisfied with that answer. She smiled at Jack, a bright, trusting smile that made him want to both protect her and run away at the same time. That night after the children were asleep, Catherine and Jack sat by the fire and talked for the first time about more than just practical matters. She misses having a father, Catherine said quietly. Benjamin too, though he tries not to show it. Our father died 5 years ago. They barely remember him. My daughter was 4 when she died, Jack heard himself saying. Grace reminds me of her, the way she looks, the way she smiles. I'm sorry, that must be hard. Everything is hard, he admitted. Has been for 5 years. I don't know how to do this. How to have people in my house again. How to care about whether someone lives or dies. But you do care. You proved that when you brought us here. Caring and knowing what to do about it are two different things. Catherine was quiet for a moment. When my mother was dying, she told me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just keep going, one day at a time, one step at a time. Not because you have all the answers, but because the alternative is giving up. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was, and she was right. We're here, Mr. Brennan, all 4 of us. We're all broken in different ways, but maybe we can help each other keep going. Jack looked at her across the firelight and felt something shift inside him. Not love. He wasn't ready for that and might never be. But something. Recognition maybe, or understanding. This woman had lost as much as he had. She was just as broken, just as scared, just as determined to keep going anyway. Maybe, he said. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. The sun emerged brilliant and blinding on the snow, turning the world into a wonderland of white and diamonds. Jack dug out the path to the barn and checked on the horses and cattle. They had survived, though they had lost 2 head to the cold. It could have been worse. That afternoon, he rode into town with Catherine to see Reverend Hayes. The Reverend was surprised to see them, but pleased when Jack explained what they wanted. You're sure about this, Jack? You know, I'm happy to perform the ceremony, but marriage is a serious commitment. I'm sure. The ceremony was brief and without romance. Jack and Catherine stood before the Reverend in the small church and spoke the vows that would bind them together. Benjamin and Grace stood as witnesses, both children, solemn and quiet, understanding that something important was happening, even if they didn't fully grasp what it meant. When Reverend Hayes pronounced them man and wife, Jack leaned down and kissed Catherine's cheek. It was chaste and brief, more a formality than anything resembling affection. But her skin was warm under his lips, and he caught the faint scent of soap and something else, something uniquely her, and for just a moment he felt something other than grief. They signed the marriage certificate and rode back to the ranch in silence. As they approached the house, Catherine finally spoke. So what happens now? Jack looked at the ranch spread out before them, at the house that had been a tomb for 5 years, at the woman beside him, who was now legally his wife, and he realized he had no idea. Now, he said, we figure it out as we go. The first week of marriage passed in a careful dance of avoidance and awkward politeness. Catherine woke each morning before dawn to start the fire and prepare breakfast. Jack came in from the barn, where he still insisted on sleeping, ate in silence, and disappeared back outside to work until darkness forced him to return. Benjamin followed Jack around like a shadow whenever allowed, eager to learn anything about ranching and horse and the hard work of keeping a homestead alive. Grace stayed close to Catherine, helping with washing and mending and the endless tasks that filled the hours of frontier life. They were 4 people living under one roof, bound by legal papers and necessity, but they were not yet a family. Catherine could feel the distance Jack maintained, could see the way his eyes would sometimes land on Grace, and then slide away as if looking too long would cause him pain. She understood, or she tried to, but understanding did not make the loneliness any easier to bear. She had thought Boston was lonely, watching her mother die while trying to keep hope alive for Benjamin and Grace. But this was a different kind of loneliness. This was being surrounded by people and still feeling utterly alone. On the 8th day, Reverend Hayes rode out to check on them. Catherine saw him coming from the kitchen window and felt a flutter of anxiety. She had not been to town since the wedding, had not seen anyone except Jack and the children. She wondered what people were saying, what stories were circulating about the mail-order bride who had arrived during a blizzard and married the reclusive rancher within a week. Jack met the Reverend at the door, and Catherine could hear their voices low and serious, though she could not make out the words. When they came inside, Reverend Hayes smiled at her warmly. Mrs. Brennan, you're looking well. How are you settling in? The name still startled her. Mrs. Brennan, as if she had truly become someone's wife, someone's partner, instead of just a stranger occupying space in a lonely man's house. Very well, thank you, Reverend. Would you like some coffee? That would be lovely. They sat at the kitchen table, the three of them, while Benjamin and Grace played quietly in the corner. Catherine poured coffee and set out some of the bread she had baked that morning. The Reverend took a sip and nodded appreciatively. You've made a good home here already, I can see that. The children look healthier than when they arrived. It was true, a week of regular meals and warm shelter had put color back in their cheeks, had smoothed away some of the gauntness that came from too many days of hunger and fear. They're resilient, Catherine said. They've been through so much, but they keep going. As do you, I imagine. Reverend Hayes looked at her with kind but knowing eyes. It cannot be easy coming to a strange place, marrying a man you barely know. Miss Brennan has been very generous. We're grateful for his help. Jack is a good man, the Reverend said, and Catherine noticed the slight emphasis on the name, the unspoken suggestion that perhaps she should stop calling her husband by his surname. He's been through a terrible loss. We all hoped in time that he might find his way back to the living. Perhaps your arrival is an answer to those prayers. Catherine glanced at Jack, who was staring into his coffee cup as if it held the secrets of the universe. His face was carefully blank, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. I don't think I'm the answer to anyone's prayers, Reverend. I'm just a woman trying to keep her family together. Sometimes that's exactly what prayers are made of. Ordinary people doing their best in difficult circumstances. After the Reverend left, Catherine found herself thinking about his words. Ordinary people doing their best. Was that all they were? Or was there something more happening here, something neither she nor Jack were quite ready to acknowledge? That night, she was clearing the supper dishes when she heard a crash from the hallway. She hurried out to find Grace standing frozen outside a closed door at the end of the hall, her face pale with shock. At her feet lay a wooden toy horse clearly dropped in fright. Jack appeared from the main room, his face dark with anger. "What are you doing?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, I was just looking, I didn't mean to." "That room is off limits." Jack's voice was harsher than Catherine had ever heard it. "I told you, no one goes in there." Catherine moved quickly to put herself between Jack and Grace, scooping up the little girl and holding her close. "She's a child, Mr. Brennan. She was curious. There's no harm done." "There's harm." Jack's voice shook slightly. "That was my daughter's room. Everything in there is exactly as she left it. I won't have anyone disturbing it." Catherine looked at the closed door, understanding flooding through her. Of course, a shrine to a dead child preserved perfectly untouched by time or change. She knew about grief. She knew about the desperate desire to hold on to anything that remained of someone lost. But she also knew that you could not live in a tomb. "I understand," she said gently, "and Grace won't go near it again." "Will you, sweetheart?" Grace shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Mr. Brennan. I'm so sorry." Jack's anger seemed to deflate as quickly as it had risen. He looked at Grace's tear-stained face, and Catherine saw something break in his expression. He turned away abruptly and walked out the front door into the cold March evening. Catherine comforted Grace until the child's sobs subsided, then tucked her into bed with Benjamin, who had watched the whole scene with worried eyes. When she came back to the main room, she found it empty. Through the window, she could see a light in the barn. Jack was out there alone with whatever demons drove him to keep the world at arm's length. She should leave him alone. She knew that. But something compelled her to put on her shawl and walk across the yard to the barn. Inside, she found Jack sitting on a hay bale, his head in his hands. "Mr. Brennan." He looked up, and in the lamplight, she could see his eyes were red. "I shouldn't have yelled at her. She's just a child. She understands. She knows you're hurting. I'm always hurting." The words came out raw and broken. "Every day for 5 years, I wake up and the first thing I remember is that they're gone. My wife, my daughter, everything I loved, just gone." Catherine sat down beside him, close but not touching. "Tell me about them." "What? Your wife, your daughter, tell me about them, not how they died, but how they lived." For a long moment, Jack said nothing. Then slowly, haltingly, he began to speak. He told her about Margaret, how they had met at a church social, how she had made him laugh with her quick wit and gentle teasing, how she could make even the hardest day better just by being there. He told her about Lily, precocious and fearless, always asking questions, always wanting to help with everything, even when she was too small to be much use. He told her about their dreams, more children, a thriving ranch, growing old together, watching grandchildren play in the yard. And then the influenza came, he said quietly. It swept through the territory like wildfire. Margaret got sick first. 3 days later, Lily started coughing. I rode for the doctor, but there were so many sick people. By the time he came, it was too late. They died within hours of each other. I buried them on the hill behind the house. Catherine felt tears on her own cheeks. I'm so sorry. Everyone's sorry, but sorry doesn't bring them back. Sorry doesn't fill the silence in this house. Sorry doesn't make it hurt any less. No, Catherine agreed. It doesn't. When my mother died, people said they were sorry too. They said she was in a better place. They said time would heal. But none of it helped. The pain was still there. So what did help? Benjamin and Grace. Having to be strong for them. Having to keep going because they needed me. It didn't make the pain go away, but it gave me a reason to carry it. Jack looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she had arrived. Is that what you think I need? A reason to carry my pain. I think you need to stop living in that locked room with your ghosts. Your daughter wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life mourning her. How would you know what she'd want? Because I know what I would want if I were her. I'd want my father to live, really live, not just exist. The words hung between them, harsh but true. Jack's jaw tightened, and for a moment Catherine thought he might be angry again. But then his shoulders sagged, and he looked away. I don't know how, he whispered. I don't know how to live when they're gone. Catherine reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough and calloused from years of hard work, and they trembled slightly in her grasp. You start small, one day at a time, one moment at a time. You let yourself feel something other than grief, even if it's just for a second. And if I can't, then I'll be here. Benjamin and Grace will be here. You won't have to do it alone. Jack's fingers tightened around hers, and they sat there in the barn, two broken people holding on to each other in the darkness. And for the first time since Catherine had arrived, she felt something shift between them. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of something. Connection, maybe, or hope. The next morning, Jack did not go straight to the barn after breakfast. Instead, he asked Benjamin if he wanted to learn how to saddle a horse properly. The boy's face lit up with such pure joy that Catherine felt her heart squeeze. She watched from the kitchen window as Jack patiently showed Benjamin each step, his big hands gentle, as he adjusted the stirrups and explained about checking the girth. Grace came to stand beside Catherine, pressing her face against the glass. Is Mr. Brennan still mad at me? No, sweetheart. He was never really mad at you. He was just quiet about his little girl. The one who died. Yes. Grace was quiet for a moment, then said, I wish I could have met her. I bet we would have been friends. Catherine pulled her close, marveling at the simple wisdom of children. They understood loss in a way adults often couldn't. They grieved, but they also kept their hearts open to new connections, new possibilities. I bet you would have too. The days began to take on a rhythm. Jack still slept in the barn, but he came in for all meals now, and sometimes he stayed afterward to help Benjamin with his reading or to sit by the fire while Catherine mended clothes. Small things, tiny movements towards something that resembled a family. And then on a bright morning in late March, everything changed. Benjamin was in the barn trying to climb up to fix a hole in the roof that Jack had pointed out the day before. Catherine was inside making bread when she heard the scream. She ran outside, her hands still covered in flour, to find Jack already racing toward the barn. Benjamin lay on the ground, his face white with pain, his right arm bent at an unnatural angle. Catherine felt her heart stop. No, please, God, no. Jack dropped to his knees beside the boy, his hands gentle as he checked for injuries. Don't move, son. Just stay still. The word son hung in the air. Jack did not seem to notice he had said it, but Benjamin did. Despite his pain, something flickered in the boy's eyes. Hope. It's my arm, Benjamin gasped. I'm sorry, I just wanted to help. You're going to be fine, Jack said, but his voice was tight with fear. Catherine recognized that fear. It was the fear of someone who had lost people before and could not bear to lose anyone else. Jack scooped Benjamin up as gently as if he were made of glass and carried him to the house. Catherine, get their things. We need to get him to the doctor in town. Now. Catherine moved quickly, gathering what they needed, while Grace clung to her skirt, crying. Within minutes, they were in the wagon, Jack driving the horses hard toward Redemption Creek, Benjamin cradled against Catherine's chest, his face gray with pain. The ride into town was the longest 30 minutes of Catherine's life. She kept whispering to Benjamin, telling him to hold on, telling him he was brave, telling him everything would be all right. But inside, she was screaming. She had already lost her mother. She could not lose Benjamin, too. Dr. Henry Caldwell was a gruff man in his 40s with kind eyes and capable hands. He examined Benjamin carefully while Catherine and Jack waited in the outer room. Grace sat between them, holding both their hands, her small face streaked with tears. When the doctor finally emerged, Catherine jumped to her feet. How is he? Broken wrist, clean break, which is good. I've set it and put it in a splint. He'll need to wear it for about 6 weeks, and he won't be doing any climbing for a while, but he'll heal just fine. The relief was so intense that Catherine's knees buckled. Jack caught her, his arms steady around her waist, and for a moment she leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. Can we see him? Jack asked. Of course, he's asking for you both. Benjamin looked small in the doctor's examination room, his arm wrapped in bandages and wooden splints. But he managed a weak smile when they entered. I'm sorry I scared you. Catherine sat beside him and brushed the hair from his forehead. Don't you dare apologize. I'm just glad you're all right. Mr. Brennan, Benjamin's voice was uncertain. Are you angry? Jack moved to stand on the other side of the bed. His face was carefully controlled, but Catherine could see the emotion churning beneath the surface. No, son, I'm not angry. I'm grateful you're okay. But no more climbing without supervision, understand? Yes, sir. I mean it, Benjamin. You gave me quite a scare. The words hung in the air, raw and honest. Benjamin's eyes widened, and then to Catherine's surprise, he reached out with his good hand and took Jack's. I'll be more careful, I promise. Jack nodded, unable to speak, and Catherine saw him blink rapidly, fighting back tears. This hard, closed-off man who had built walls around his heart was cracking open, and it was beautiful and terrible to witness. Dr. Caldwell said Benjamin should stay in town overnight for observation, so Catherine sent Jack and Grace back to the ranch with promises to send word if anything changed. She sat beside Benjamin's bed through the long hours of the night, watching him sleep, thanking God or fate or whatever force had kept him safe. In the small hours before dawn, when the world was quiet and still, she finally let herself cry. Not just for Benjamin's close call, but for everything. For her mother, for the life they had lost in Boston, for the uncertainty of their future, for the strange marriage she found herself in, with a man who was still in love with a ghost. When Jack returned the next morning to bring them home, he looked like he had not slept. He helped Benjamin into the wagon with infinite care, then turned to Catherine. You stayed with him all night. Of course, he's my brother. You must be exhausted. I'll sleep when we get home. Home. The word slipped out naturally, and Catherine saw Jack notice it. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not quite a smile, but close. The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the frantic journey to town had been. Benjamin dozed against Catherine's shoulder while Grace chattered about how she had helped Jack feed the chickens that morning and how one of the hens had laid an egg right in front of her. When they reached the house, Jack carried Benjamin inside and settled him on the sofa near the fire. Catherine tucked blankets around him while Grace fussed over her brother, bringing him water and his favorite book. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Catherine and Jack sat by the fire in silence. The events of the day hung heavy between them all, the fear and relief and unspoken emotions. Finally, Jack spoke. When I saw him on the ground, I felt something I haven't felt in 5 years. Fear of losing someone I care about. I realized that somewhere along the way, without meaning to, I started to care about that boy. About Grace. He paused, looking at her. About you. Catherine's breath caught. Is that such a terrible thing? It's terrifying. Every person you love is someone you can lose. I know that better than anyone. But isn't it also beautiful to care about someone enough that losing them would hurt? Isn't that what makes life worth living? Jack looked at her, and in the firelight, his blue eyes seemed to hold entire oceans of emotion. I don't know if I'm brave enough for that again. You don't have to be brave all at once, just a little bit at a time. He reached out and took her hand just as she had taken his in the barn all those nights ago. His thumb traced patterns on her palm, and Catherine felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. Thank you, he said quietly, for being here, for staying with Benjamin, for not giving up on this strange arrangement we have. Where else would I go? Catherine said with a small smile. You're stuck with us now, Mr. Brennan. Jack? What? Call me Jack. We're married after all. Seems foolish to keep using surnames. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental. Catherine smiled. All right, Jack. He smiled back and it transformed his face. She had seen him serious, angry, grief-stricken, but never truly happy. The smile was like sunrise after a long, dark night. Over the following week, as Benjamin recovered, the dynamics in the household shifted in subtle but significant ways. Jack began teaching Benjamin to do ranch tasks one-handed, refusing to let the injury make the boy feel useless. He showed him how to curry the horses, how to check the water troughs, how to mend tack. Catherine watched them together and felt something warm and hopeful growing in her chest. Jack was becoming what he swore he could not be: a father figure, a protector, a teacher. Grace, meanwhile, had appointed herself Benjamin's personal nurse, bringing him food and water, reading to him when he was bored, making him laugh with her silly jokes. The house that had been so silent and empty was now filled with voices, with laughter, with life. And Catherine found herself watching Jack when he did not know she was looking. Found herself noticing the strength in his hands, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness he showed with the children, despite his gruff exterior. Found herself wondering what it would be like if this marriage were real and more than just name. The thought should have frightened her. She barely knew this man. Their arrangement was supposed to be temporary, practical, nothing more. But her heart seemed to have other ideas. One evening after the children were in bed, Catherine was washing dishes when Jack came to stand beside her with a towel to dry. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before he spoke. I've been thinking, he said carefully, about our arrangement. Catherine's heart stuttered. Was he going to ask her to leave? Had she misread everything? I know we agreed this was temporary, Jack continued, that after the storm passed we would figure something else out. But it's been 5 weeks now, and I've realized something. What's that? I don't want you to leave, any of you. This house, it's been dead for so long, but now it feels alive again. You and the children, you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. Purpose, hope, maybe even happiness, though I'm almost afraid to call it that. Catherine set down the dish she was holding, her hands trembling slightly. Are you saying you want this arrangement to continue? I'm saying I want it to be more than an arrangement. I want us to really try to be a family, not just for show, not just for practicality, but because I think we could be good for each other. I think we already are. Before Catherine could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Jack frowned. It was late for visitors, and they were miles from town. He moved to answer it while Catherine dried her hands, her heart still racing from his words. She heard Jack open the door, heard him say, "Can I help you?" in a tone that was more defensive than welcoming. Then she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. Good evening. I'm looking for my niece, Catherine Morrison. I believe she's staying here. Silas, Catherine's uncle, had found them. She moved quickly to the door, positioning herself beside Jack. Silas stood on the porch looking just as cold and calculating as he had on the train. Behind him stood another man, older, with a stern face and papers in his hand. Uncle Silas, Catherine said, her voice steady despite her fear. What are you doing here? I came to check on you and the children, of course. I was concerned when I heard you'd entered into a hasty marriage with a stranger, and it seems my concerns were justified. He gestured to the man beside him. This is Mr. Preston, an attorney. He's helped me file for custody of Benjamin and Grace. Catherine felt the world tilt. What? You have no right. I have every right. I'm their blood relative. You're just their sister, barely an adult yourself, and married to a man you met less than 2 months ago. What kind of stable home is this for children? Jack stepped forward, his body language protective. This is a fine home, and those children are well cared for. Catherine is my wife, legally married, which gives her every right to raise her siblings. The attorney, Mr. Preston, consulted his papers. Actually, Mr. Brennan, Wyoming law is quite clear. In matters of custody, blood relatives take precedence unless there's evidence of unfitness. Mr. Morrison is the children's uncle. He has a strong legal claim. This is about money, Catherine said, suddenly understanding flooding through her. You don't care about Benjamin and Grace. You just want access to grandfather's inheritance. Silas smiled coldly. I care about what's best for the children. And living on a remote ranch with a sister who entered into a marriage of convenience is not what's best. A judge will see that. We'll see what a judge says, Jack said firmly. Now get off my property. We'll be filing the custody petition tomorrow, Mr. Preston said. The hearing will be in 2 weeks. I suggest you retain legal counsel, Mrs. Brennan. They left and Catherine sagged against the door frame, all the strength draining out of her. This could not be happening. They had finally found safety, had finally begun to build something like a real life, and now Silas was going to tear it all apart. Jack closed the door and turned to her, his face grim but determined. We'll fight this. We'll get a lawyer. We'll prove that you're a fit guardian. But what if we can't? What if the judge sides with Silas? He's their blood uncle. He's a man of means. And I'm just, she gestured helplessly at herself. I'm nobody. A woman who married a stranger out of desperation. Jack took her by the shoulders, forcing her to look at him. You are not nobody. You are the bravest woman I've ever met. You've kept your family together through impossible circumstances. You've made a home here. You've brought life back into this house and into my heart. No judge is going to take those children away from you. I won't allow it. How can you stop it? He was quiet for a moment, his mind clearly working through options. Then his jaw set with determination. There's one way to make sure no judge questions the legitimacy of our marriage. One way to prove that this is a real family, not just a legal convenience. Catherine's breath caught. She understood what he was suggesting. We make this marriage real, Jack said quietly, in every way. If we're truly man and wife, not just on paper, it strengthens your legal position. It shows the judge that these children are being raised in a proper home by a proper married couple. Jack, you can't. You said you weren't ready. You said you still loved Margaret. I will always love Margaret, but she's gone and you're here. And somewhere in the past few weeks, you've become important to me. More important than I wanted to admit. If doing this helps protect you and the children, then I want to do it. Not just for legal reasons, but because I want to try. To really try to move forward. With you. Catherine felt tears burning in her eyes. Are you sure? Because once we do this, there's no going back. This won't be an arrangement anymore. It'll be real. I know, and I'm sure. She looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. He was afraid, yes. Still grieving, yes. But he was also ready. Ready to take a chance. Ready to let someone in again. Then yes, she whispered, let's make this real. Jack pulled her into his arms, and for the first time, Catherine allowed herself to relax completely into his embrace. He was so solid, so strong, and for this moment at least, she did not have to carry everything alone. That night, after Catherine had checked on the children one last time and found them sleeping peacefully, she returned to find Jack waiting in the hallway outside what had been his bedroom, the room he had not slept in since they arrived. Are you certain about this? He asked one more time. In answer, Catherine took his hand and led him inside. The room was simple but comfortable, dominated by a large bed with a quilt that looked handmade. On the dresser was the photograph Catherine had seen that first night, the image of Margaret and Lily frozen in happiness. Jack followed her gaze. I should put that away. No, Catherine said. They were part of your life. They helped make you who you are. I'm not asking you to forget them. And what are you asking? Just that you make room for us too. For me and Benjamin and Grace. For the family we're trying to build. Jack nodded slowly, and then with careful deliberation, he picked up the photograph and opened a drawer, placing it gently inside. I'll always remember them. But they're my past. You're my future. If you'll have me. Catherine's answer was to step closer and rise on her toes to kiss him. It was tentative at first, both of them uncertain, but then Jack's arms came around her and he deepened the kiss, and Catherine felt something inside her unfurl like a flower opening to the sun. They took their time learning each other, discovering what brought pleasure and comfort. Jack was gentle, almost reverent, as if Catherine were something precious that might break. And Catherine, who had been strong for so long, who had carried so much weight on her shoulders, finally allowed herself to be vulnerable, to be cared for, to be loved. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, Jack's arm around Catherine, her head on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, and she felt safer than she had in years. "Thank you," Jack whispered into her hair, "for giving me another chance at this, at happiness. Thank you for saving us, not just from the storm, but from everything." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's warmth, and for the first time since coming to Wyoming, Catherine dreamed not of the past, but of the future. Morning came with pale, golden light streaming through the window. Catherine woke to find Jack already awake, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I was just thinking how strange life is. A month ago I was alone and convinced I always would be. Now I wake up with a wife in my arms and two children sleeping down the hall, and it feels right. Terrifying, but right." Catherine smiled and kissed him softly. "We should get up. The children will be awake soon." They dressed and made their way to the kitchen where Catherine started breakfast, while Jack went to check on the livestock. When he returned, Benjamin and Grace were at the table, and Catherine had pancakes cooking on the griddle. Grace looked between Catherine and Jack, her young face thoughtful. Then she smiled a knowing smile that made her look far older than her 8 years. "You two finally figured it out." "Figured what out, sweetheart?" Catherine asked, trying to hide her blush. "That you love each other. Benjamin and I have been waiting for you to realize it." Benjamin nodded sagely. "We've been taking bets on how long it would take." Jack laughed, a real, genuine laugh that filled the kitchen with warmth. "Have you now, and who won?" "Grace did. I thought it would take at least another month." They ate breakfast together, a real family, and Catherine felt her heart so full it might burst. But beneath the happiness lurked the shadow of Silas's threat. In 2 weeks, they would stand before a judge who would decide whether Benjamin and Grace stayed with her or were taken away to live with an uncle who saw them only as a means to an inheritance. After breakfast, Jack pulled Catherine aside. "I'm riding into town to speak with Samuel Fletcher. He's the best lawyer in Redemption Creek. We need someone who can fight Silas's petition." "I'm coming with you." "Catherine, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. They're my family. This is my fight, too." They left Benjamin and Grace with Abigail Whitmore, who was more than happy to watch them for the day. The ride into town was quiet, both of them lost in thought. Catherine kept thinking about what they would say to the lawyer, how they would prove that she and Jack could provide a better home than Silas. Samuel Fletcher's office was above the general store, a small room lined with law books and smelling of pipe tobacco. The lawyer himself was a thin man in his 60s with sharp eyes and an air of competence. Jack explained the situation while Fletcher listened occasionally, making notes. When Jack finished, the lawyer sat back and steepled his fingers. "This is a difficult case, I won't lie to you. Wyoming courts do tend to favor blood relatives in custody matters. However, you have several points in your favor. First, you're legally married, which provides stability. Second, the children have been thriving in your care. Third, if we can prove that Mr. Morrison's motives are financial rather than genuinely concerned with the children's welfare, that will work against him." "How do we prove that?" Catherine asked. "We'll need documentation of the inheritance, proof that Morrison only showed interest in the children after learning about the money. We'll need character witnesses who can attest to your fitness as guardians. And we'll need the children themselves to testify if they're willing about where they want to live." Catherine felt sick at the thought of putting Benjamin and Grace through that. But what choice did they have? "We'll do whatever it takes," Jack said firmly. "Those children belong with Catherine, their family." Fletcher nodded. "Then we have 2 weeks to build the strongest case possible. Let's get to work." They spent the rest of the day at the lawyer's office, going over every detail of their situation, providing names of people who could serve as character witnesses, discussing strategy. By the time they rode back to the ranch to collect the children, Catherine's head was spinning. That night, after Benjamin and Grace were asleep, Jack found Catherine sitting on the porch staring out at the darkness. He sat beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. "We're going to win this," he said. "I promise you." "You can't promise that. Silas has money connections, the law on his side. And we have love. We have a real home. We have each other. That has to count for something." Catherine leaned into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I'm scared, Jack. I can't lose them. They're all I have left of my mother, of my family. They're not all you have. You have me now, and I'm not going anywhere. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Jack and Catherine met with Samuel Fletcher multiple times, gathering documents, preparing testimony. Reverend Hayes agreed to speak on their behalf, as did Dr. Caldwell and several of Jack's neighbors, who had seen how well the children were doing. Abigail Whitmore was particularly vocal in her support. Those children have transformed Jack, she told Catherine over coffee one afternoon. I've known him for 15 years, and I've never seen him as alive as he is now. You've given him back his life, Catherine. Don't let anyone take that away. But even with all of their preparation, Catherine could not shake the fear that it would not be enough. That some judge in some courtroom would decide that blood mattered more than love, that legal ties mattered more than the bonds they had forged through hardship and hope. The night before the hearing, Catherine could not sleep. She lay in bed beside Jack, her mind racing through every possible outcome, every terrible scenario. Catherine, Jack whispered in the darkness, stop thinking so loud. You're keeping me awake. Despite everything, she smiled. Sorry, I can't help it. He pulled her closer, his arms strong and reassuring around her. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. You're not alone in this anymore. I know. What if it's not enough? What if the judge rules against us? Then we'll appeal. We'll fight. We'll do whatever we have to do. But I don't think it will come to that. I think when the judge sees how much those children love you, how well they're doing, he'll make the right decision. Catherine wanted to believe him. She desperately wanted to believe that love would be enough, that doing the right thing mattered, that justice would prevail. But she had lived long enough to know that the world was not always fair, that good people lost and bad people won, that sometimes all the love in the world could not protect you from loss. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, holding tight to Jack and praying to a God she was not sure was listening, that tomorrow would bring them the miracle they needed. The courthouse in Redemption Creek was a modest building of weathered wood and stone, but on this cold April morning it felt as imposing as any cathedral. Catherine stood on the steps with Jack's hand warm and steady in hers, trying to calm the frantic beating of her heart. Inside that building, a judge would decide the fate of her family. Inside, everything she had fought for could be taken away. Benjamin and Grace stood close beside them both, children dressed in their Sunday best. Benjamin's arm was still in its splint, a visible reminder of the accident that had somehow brought them all closer together. Grace clutched a small rag doll that Jack had bought her in town, her knuckles white with tension. It's going to be all right, Catherine told them, though she was not sure if she was trying to convince the children or herself. Samuel Fletcher met them at the entrance, his expression serious but not without hope. Remember what we discussed. Answer the questions truthfully and simply. Don't let Morrison's lawyer rattle you. And children, he looked at Benjamin and Grace, if you're called to testify, just tell the truth about how you feel. That's all anyone can ask. The courtroom was small, with wooden benches for spectators and a raised platform where Judge William Crawford would preside. The judge was a man in his 60s with steel gray hair and a face that revealed nothing of his thoughts. He had a reputation for being fair but strict, unswayed by emotion or sentiment. Silas Morrison sat on the opposite side of the room with his attorney, Mr. Preston. Silas looked confident, almost smug, like a man who knew he held all the winning cards. When his eyes met Catherine's, he smiled coldly. The hearing began with opening statements. Mr. Preston painted a picture of Catherine as a desperate woman who had entered into a questionable marriage with a virtual stranger, dragging 2 innocent children into an unstable situation. He spoke of Silas Morrison as a successful businessman, a blood relative who could provide a proper home with all the advantages that money could buy. Samuel Fletcher countered with the story of a courageous young woman who had sacrificed everything to keep her family together, who had found an honorable man willing to help them, and who had built a loving home where the children were thriving. Then came the testimony. Mr. Preston called Silas first. Under oath, Silas spoke eloquently about his concern for his niece and nephew, about how he had searched for them after learning of his sister's death, about his desire to provide them with stability and opportunity. Mr. Morrison, Fletcher said when it was his turn to cross-examine, when did you first learn about your sister's death? in late February shortly after it occurred. And yet you didn't come to Boston to help with the funeral arrangements, to offer assistance to the children. Silas shifted slightly. I was out of the country on business. I came as soon as I could. I see. And can you tell the court about your relationship with your sister prior to her death? When was the last time you saw her? It had been some years we had lost touch. How many years, Mr. Morrison? Perhaps 15. 15 years. And in those 15 years, did you ever send money to help support your sister and her children? Did you write letters? Did you make any attempt to maintain family ties? We had our differences. So for 15 years, you had no contact with your sister or her children. But the moment she dies, you suddenly develop a deep concern for their welfare. Isn't that convenient? Objection, Mr. Preston said sharply. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained, Judge Crawford said. Mr. Fletcher, please rephrase. Fletcher nodded. Mr. Morrison, are you aware that your father left a trust fund for his grandchildren? Silas's jaw tightened. I am aware of the trust, yes. And that trust is substantial, does it not? Approximately $5,000 to be divided among his grandchildren when they reach majority. I believe that's correct. And as the legal guardian of Benjamin and Grace Morrison, you would have control over that money until they come of age, would you not? I would be responsible for managing it in their best interests. I'm sure you would, Fletcher said dryly. No further questions. When it was time for Catherine and Jack to testify, Catherine felt her hands shaking as she placed them on the Bible to swear her oath. She had never been in a courtroom before, had never been subjected to this kind of scrutiny. Mr. Preston's questions were designed to paint her as irresponsible and impulsive. Had she not traveled across the country to marry a man she had never met? Had she not entered into this marriage primarily for financial security? Could she honestly say she knew Jack Brennan well enough to trust him with the welfare of two young children? Catherine answered as honestly as she could. Yes, she had married Jack quickly, but out of necessity, not frivolity. Yes, she had been desperate, but that desperation had led her to make a choice that had proven to be right. She knew Jack Brennan as a kind, honorable man who had shown nothing but care and protection for her and the children. When Samuel Fletcher questioned her, she was able to tell the fuller story. How she had nursed her mother through a terminal illness while trying to provide for two children. How she had exhausted every other option before accepting the mail-order bride arrangement. How Jack had taken them in during a blizzard that would have killed them. How he had married her to protect her reputation and give the children a stable home. How that arrangement had grown into something real, something good. Mrs. Brennan, Fletcher asked gently, in the weeks you've been at the ranch, have your brother and sister been well cared for? Yes, better than I could have hoped. They have regular meals, warm beds, medical care when needed. Benjamin is learning to work the ranch. Grace helps in the house and with the animals. They're learning and growing and happy. And Mr. Brennan, how does he treat the children? Catherine looked over at Jack, who sat watching her with those steady blue eyes. He treats them with kindness and patience. He teaches Benjamin about ranching and takes time to answer his endless questions. He makes Grace laugh. He's become the father they lost. When Jack took the stand, his testimony was brief but powerful. He spoke plainly about his initial reluctance to take on a ready-made family, about the walls he had built around his heart after losing his wife and daughter. But then he spoke about watching Catherine care for her siblings with such fierce devotion, about Benjamin's eagerness to learn about Grace's bright spirit. He spoke about the night Benjamin was injured, about the fear that had gripped him, about the realization that these children had somehow become his to protect. Mr. Brennan, Mr. Preston said during cross-examination, isn't it true that you attempted to cancel the mail-order bride arrangement before Mrs. Brennan even arrived? Yes. Why was that? Jack was quiet for a moment. Because I was afraid. I had convinced myself that I was better off alone, that I could never have a family again without betraying the memory of the one I lost. So you didn't actually want a wife and children? I didn't think I did. I was wrong. How convenient that you changed your mind. Tell me, Mr. Brennan, did your feelings about this arrangement change before or after you learned about the Children's Trust Fund? Jack's eyes went cold. I don't know anything about a trust fund, and I don't want anything from those children except to see them safe and happy. A noble sentiment, but the fact remains that you're a rancher of modest means, and $5,000 is a considerable sum. I have enough to provide for my family. I don't need their money. Your family. You've known these children for less than 2 months. Time doesn't matter. What matters is that I care about them, that I'm committed to raising them, that I've given them my name and my protection. That makes them family. Fletcher then called character witnesses. Reverend Hayes testified about the transformation he had seen in Jack, about the warmth and stability of the Brennan household. Dr. Caldwell spoke about how well Benjamin and Grace appeared both physically and emotionally, and how attentive both Catherine and Jack had been during Benjamin's injury. Abigail Whitmore testified about the love evident in the family, about the laughter she heard when she visited, about how the children had brought Jack back to life. Finally, Judge Crawford called Benjamin and Grace forward. Catherine's heart clenched as her siblings approached the bench, both of them so small and vulnerable. The judge's voice was gentler than it had been all day. Benjamin, Grace, I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions. You don't need to be afraid. Just tell me the truth. Can you do that? Both children nodded. Benjamin, you're 10 years old, is that right? Yes, sir. And you've been living at the Brennan Ranch for about 8 weeks now? Yes, sir. How do you like it there? Benjamin glanced at Catherine, then back at the judge. I like it very much, sir, Mr. Jack. He's teaching me about horses and cattle and how to work a ranch. He's patient with me even when I make mistakes, and Catherine takes good care of us. We have enough to eat and warm beds, and we're safe. What about your Uncle Silas? You know he wants you and your sister to come live with him? Benjamin's face tightened. Uncle Silas didn't care about us when Mama was alive. He never came to visit, never sent letters or money. He only showed up after Mama died, and we didn't have anyone else. I think he wants the money Grandfather left us, not us. That's a serious accusation, Benjamin. It's what I believe, sir, and I don't want to live with him. I want to stay with Catherine and Jack. They're my family now. Judge Crawford turned to Grace. And you, young lady, how do you feel? Grace clutched her doll tighter. When she spoke, her voice was small but clear. I miss my mama, but Catherine takes care of me just like Mama did. And Jack, he's nice to me. He bought me this doll, and he taught me how to feed the chickens, and he reads me stories sometimes before bed. I don't know Uncle Silas. I don't want to go with a stranger. But Mr. Brennan was a stranger too when you first met him, wasn't he? Yes, but he saved us from the blizzard. He gave us a home when we didn't have anywhere to go. He's not a stranger anymore. He's my papa. The word hung in the air, simple and devastating in its truth. Catherine saw Jack's eyes close briefly, saw the emotion flash across his face. All right, children, the judge said kindly. You can go sit down now. Thank you for your honesty. After the children returned to their seats, Judge Crawford called for a brief recess to consider the evidence. Catherine and Jack waited in the hallway with Fletcher, neither of them able to speak. Benjamin and Grace sat on a bench between them holding hands. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Finally, they were called back into the courtroom. Judge Crawford looked at them all with an expression that revealed nothing. I've considered all the testimony and evidence presented today, he began. This is not an easy decision. On one hand, we have Mr. Morrison, a blood relative with financial means and a legal claim to guardianship. On the other hand, we have Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, who have provided care and shelter for these children and clearly have their best interests at heart. Catherine held her breath. However, the judge continued, in matters of child welfare, I must consider what is truly best for the children, not what is most convenient or legally simple. I've heard testimony that Mr. Morrison had no relationship with these children or their mother for 15 years. I've heard testimony suggesting his motives may be financial rather than genuinely concerned with the children's welfare. And most importantly, I've heard from the children themselves about where they feel safe and loved. He paused, and Catherine felt Jack's hand tighten around hers. Therefore, I am ruling in favor of Mr. and Mrs. Brennan. Legal guardianship of Benjamin and Grace Morrison will remain with their sister, Catherine Brennan, and her husband, Jackson Brennan. Mr. Morrison's petition for the custody is denied. The relief was so overwhelming that Catherine's knees went weak. Jack caught her, holding her steady, and she heard Benjamin's whoop of joy, felt Grace crash into her in a fierce hug. Silas stood abruptly, his face dark with anger. This is outrageous. Those children are my blood relatives. I have rights. You have no rights to children you abandoned for 15 years, Judge Crawford said sternly. And Mr. Morrison, I'm warning you now, if you continue to pursue this matter or attempt to contact these children against their will, I will hold you in contempt. Do I make myself clear? Silas's jaw worked, but he said nothing. He turned and stormed out of the courtroom, his lawyer hurrying after him. Catherine sank onto the bench, pulling both children into her arms, tears streaming down her face. They had won. They were safe. They could stay together. Jack knelt beside them, his arms coming around all three of them, and for a moment they stayed like that, a family united, grateful beyond words. Outside the courthouse in the spring sunshine, Samuel Fletcher shook their hands and offered his congratulations. Reverend Hayes and Abigail Whitmore were waiting with warm embraces and kind words. The ordeal was over. They could go home. But as they rode back to the ranch in the wagon, Catherine felt a strange unease she could not quite name. They had won the custody battle, yes, but there was still something wrong, something she could not put her finger on. That evening, after the children were in bed and the initial joy had settled into quiet contentment, Jack sat at the kitchen table going through the mail that had accumulated during their time preparing for the hearing. Catherine was washing the supper dishes when she heard him swear softly. "What is it?" Jack held up a letter, his face pale. "It's from the bank, from Lucas Stone. The loan I took out nearly 3 years ago to expand the ranch has reached its final payment deadline. All of it, $800. Due in 30 days or they'll foreclose on the property." Catherine dried her hands and came to read over his shoulder. The letter was formal and cold, stating the terms clearly. $800 by May 15th, or the bank would seize the ranch to cover the debt. "I don't understand," Catherine said. "You've been making payments, haven't you?" "Regular payments, yes. But the original loan term was 3 years, and I used most of the cattle profits to buy more breeding stock last fall. I thought the final payment was due in August, but Lucas must have the right to call it early if he wants. Knowing Lucas, he made sure to include clauses that gave him maximum flexibility. Can he do that? If it's in the contract, yes. And knowing Lucas, he made sure to include clauses that gave him maximum flexibility." Jack's voice was bitter. "He's wanted this land for years. He tried to buy it from me after Margaret died, offered a pittance, and acted offended when I refused. This is his way of forcing my hand." Catherine sat down across from him, her mind racing. "How much money do we have?" "Maybe $50 in savings from what little I had set aside before you arrived." "Nowhere near enough. Could we sell some cattle?" "Not in time and not for enough to make up the difference. It would take months to arrange a sale, and we'd get maybe half what they're worth in a hurry sale." Catherine felt panic rising in her chest. They had just won the fight to keep Benjamin and Grace. Now they were going to lose their home, the ranch that Jack had built with his own hands, the place where they had finally begun to feel like a family. "There has to be something we can do." Jack's face was set in grim lines. "I could try to get a loan from another bank, but that would take time too, and there's no guarantee. Most banks won't touch a debt this size on a ranch this remote." "What about your neighbors? Surely someone could help." "These are ranchers, Catherine. Good people, but they live season to season, just like we do. None of them have $800 lying around." Catherine stood and began to pace, thinking furiously. There had to be a solution. They had come too far, survived too much to lose everything now. Then an idea struck her. A dangerous, risky idea, but possibly their only chance. "What if I went to work for Lucas Stone?" she said slowly. Jack's head snapped up. "Absolutely not. Just hear me out. You said he's wanted this land for years. What if I offered to work for him to help him with bookkeeping or managing his household? I could negotiate a wage that would help us pay down the debt." Catherine, Lucas Stone is not a good man. He's ambitious and ruthless, and he doesn't do anything out of charity. If you went to work for him, he would find a way to use it against us. "We're out of options, Jack, unless you have a better idea." He didn't, and they both knew it. Jack sat silent for a long moment, his jaw tight with frustration and fear. Finally, he spoke. "If you're going to do this, I'm coming with you. We'll approach Lucas together, make it clear that this is a business arrangement and nothing more." "That defeats the purpose. He won't give me work if you're hovering over my shoulder. Besides, you need to stay here and run the ranch. I don't like this. I don't either, but I like the thought of losing our home even less. The next morning, Catherine rode into town alone despite Jack's protests. She told herself she was being practical, that this was just another sacrifice she had to make for her family. But in truth, she was frightened. She knew Lucas Stone by reputation, a successful banker and businessman who had come to Wyoming from back east and built a small empire through shrewd dealing and ruthless business practices. His house was the largest in Redemption Creek, a two-story structure that looked out of place among the modest frontier buildings. Catherine tied her horse out front and smoothed her dress before knocking on the door. A housekeeper answered, a stern-looking woman who looked Catherine up and down with obvious disapproval before showing her to Lucas Stone's study. Lucas was a handsome man in his early 40s with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that were intelligent and calculating. He rose when Catherine entered, his smile polite, but with an edge of something else beneath it. "Mrs. Brennan, what an unexpected pleasure. Please sit down." Catherine remained standing. "I'll be brief, Mr. Stone. My husband received your letter about the loan. We're prepared to pay what we owe, but we need more time. I'm afraid the terms of the loan are quite clear. The full amount is due by mid-May. We understand that, but we're asking for an extension. 6 months. We can make regular payments and have the full amount to you by November." Lucas sat on the edge of his desk, studying her. "And why would I agree to that? The contract gives me the right to foreclose if payment isn't made on time. That ranch is prime land. I could sell it for twice what Jack owes me. Because it's the right thing to do. Because my husband has been making regular payments and has never missed a deadline before. Because we have children who need a stable home." "Ah, yes, the children. I heard about your custody battle. Congratulations on winning. Though I imagine it's only a matter of time before you face another crisis, another emergency that threatens to tear your family apart. That seems to be your pattern." Catherine felt anger flare but kept her voice level. "What would it take for you to extend the loan term? What do you want?" Lucas's smile widened slightly. "What I want is for people to honor their commitments, but I'm a reasonable man. Perhaps we could come to an arrangement. You mentioned in your petition to the court that you worked as the housekeeper in Boston. Is that correct?" "Yes. I'm in need of someone to help manage my household and assist with bookkeeping. The work isn't difficult, but it requires someone educated and trustworthy. If you were willing to work for me for, say, 3 months, I would be willing to credit a portion of your wages toward the loan and extend the deadline." It was exactly what Catherine had hoped for, and yet something about the way Lucas said it made her uneasy. But what choice did she have? "How much would you pay?" $300 over 3 months. That would reduce the debt to $500, a much more manageable amount, and I'd extend the deadline to August. It was generous, almost too generous. "And what exactly would my duties involve?" "Household management, bookkeeping, correspondence. Nothing untoward, I assure you. Though I would need you to work here at the house Monday through Friday from 8 in the morning until 5 in the evening. That would mean leaving the ranch every day, leaving Jack alone to manage the work and care for Benjamin and Grace. But it was only 3 months. They could manage for 3 months. I accept, but I want it in writing. A contract specifying my duties and your agreement to extend the loan. Of course, I'll have my attorney draw up the papers. You can start next Monday." Catherine left Lucas Stone's house feeling like she had just made a deal with the devil, but at least it was a deal that might save their home. Jack was furious when she told him what she had agreed to. "I told you I didn't want you working for that man. And I told you we don't have a choice. This is the only way to save the ranch, Jack. 3 months of work for $300 and an extension on the loan. It's a good deal." "It's a trap. Lucas Stone doesn't do anything without an ulterior motive." "Maybe, but it's a trap we have to walk into because we have no other options." They argued back and forth, but in the end, Jack knew she was right. They signed the contract Lucas's attorney brought out to the ranch, and the following Monday, Catherine began her new position. The first week was exactly as Lucas had described. Catherine managed the household staff, organized his correspondence, and helped reconcile his business accounts. Lucas was polite but distant, their interactions brief and professional. The second week, things began to change. Lucas started finding excuses to work in the same room as Catherine, to stand close when reviewing documents, to let his hand brush against hers when passing papers. Nothing overt enough to protest, but enough to make Catherine uncomfortable. By the third week, the discomfort had grown into genuine unease. Lucas began making comments about how Catherine was wasted on a struggling rancher, how a woman of her intelligence and beauty deserved better than a life of hardship on the frontier. He spoke of his own success, his connections back east, the life he could provide for someone special. Catherine tried to maintain professional boundaries, to focus on her work and ignore the implications. But Lucas was not easily deterred. One afternoon in the fourth week, Catherine was working in the study when Lucas came in and closed the door behind him. She felt her pulse quicken with alarm. "Mr. Stone, I need that door open." "Do you?" He moved closer, and Catherine stood, putting the desk between them. "We're alone in the house, Catherine. The staff have the afternoon off. No one would know if we took a moment to be honest with each other." "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do. I've seen how Jack Brennan treats you. With respect, perhaps, but without passion. You deserve more than a marriage of convenience to a man still in love with a coast." "My marriage is none of your concern." "Isn't it? I hold the mortgage on your home, Catherine. I hold your future in my hands. And I'm willing to be very generous to someone who knows how to be appreciative." Catherine felt ice in her veins. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we could help each other. I could forgive the entire debt, give you and your family financial security. All you have to do is be kind to me. No one needs to know." "You're despicable." Lucas's expression hardened. "I'm realistic. You came to me asking for help. I'm offering it. The choice is yours." "The choice is easy. I quit. Effective immediately." She grabbed her coat and headed for the door, but Lucas moved to block her path. He was not physically threatening, but his presence was menacing enough. "Walk out that door and the debt comes due in full. You have 3 weeks to come up with $800. You can't do it, and we both know it. By June, the ranch will be mine, and you'll be homeless again. Is that what you want for those children you fought so hard to keep?" Catherine's hands shook with rage and fear. "Get out of my way. Think about what you're throwing away. Think about what you're choosing. A man who can barely provide for you or security and comfort beyond anything you've ever known. I'm choosing my family. Now move." Something in her voice must have convinced him she meant it. Lucas stepped aside and Catherine fled the house, not stopping until she was on her horse and riding hard toward home. Jack met her in the yard, taking one look at her face and pulling her into his arms. "What happened?" Catherine told him everything, her voice shaking with anger and humiliation. Jack's face went dark with fury. "I'm going to kill him." "No, you're not. You're going to stay here with me and the children, and we're going to figure this out together." "But how?" They had less than 3 weeks to find $800 or lose everything. That night, after Catherine had tucked Benjamin and Grace into bed, she sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. All their fighting, all their struggling, and it was going to end like this. They would lose the ranch. They would have to start over somewhere else if they could even afford to do that. Maybe the judge would reconsider the custody arrangement if they were homeless and destitute. Jack sat down beside her and took her hand. "We'll find a way. How we've exhausted every option. There's always a way. We just haven't thought of it yet." But as the days passed and the deadline drew closer, that way remained elusive. They sold what they could spare, every piece of equipment or livestock they could afford to lose, but it was nowhere near enough. They had maybe $400 in total. They were still 400 short. Then 1 week before the debt came due, Reverend Hayes arrived at the ranch with an envelope in his hand and an expression Catherine could not quite read. "I was going through old records at the church," he said, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. "Records of births and deaths and marriages. And I came across something I think you should see." He handed the envelope to Catherine. Inside was a document yellowed with age but still legible. A will dated 15 years earlier, signed by Jonathan Morrison, Catherine's grandfather. "I don't understand. Silas already tried to use the trust fund to gain custody." "Read it carefully, Catherine. All of it." She did, and as she read, her eyes widened. The trust fund that Silas had mentioned was real, yes, but there was more. a clause that stated if any of Jonathan Morrison's grandchildren were orphaned before the age of 25, control of the trust would pass to their legal guardian until they reached majority. But more importantly, there was a second bequest, a piece of property in Boston rented out for income that was to be given outright to any grandchild who achieved financial independence before the age of 25. The property was currently valued at approximately $5,000. I'm 22, Catherine whispered, and I'm married managing a household caring for siblings. That counts as financial independence, doesn't it? I believe it does, Reverend Hayes said with a smile. And since Silas never filed the proper paperwork to claim the trust as guardian, the entire estate is still legally under the control of the church as executor until the grandchildren reach majority, which means you have the right to sell that property and use the proceeds however you see fit. Catherine looked at Jack, her heart pounding. We could sell it, pay off the debt, and have money left over. It would take time, Jack cautioned. We have 1 week. The property is already rented, Reverend Hayes said. I contacted the tenants yesterday. They've been wanting to buy for years. They can have the money wired within 3 days if you agree to the sale. It was the miracle they needed. The answer to prayers Catherine had been afraid to even voice. Within 4 days, the money arrived by wire transfer. Catherine stood in the bank with $5,200 to her name, feeling like she was holding a fortune. She paid Lucas Stone the full $800 in cash, setting the money on his desk with hands that shook with rage and satisfaction. That's the debt paid in full, Mr. Stone. You no longer have any claim on our ranch. Lucas looked at the money, then at her, his expression unreadable. I underestimated you, Mrs. Brennan. That's a mistake I won't make again. See that you don't. And Mr. Stone, if you ever approach me or my family with propositions like the one you made, I'll make sure every person in this territory knows exactly what kind of man you are. She turned and walked out, feeling lighter than she had in months. With the debt paid, Catherine and Jack threw themselves into building the life they had fought so hard to preserve. Jack used some of the remaining money to expand the herd and make improvements to the ranch. Catherine ordered supplies to expand the vegetable garden and bought laying hens to start a small egg business. Benjamin flourished under Jack's teaching, becoming a skilled horseman and ranch hand despite his young age. Grace developed a talent for animal husbandry, her chicken operation growing until she was selling eggs throughout the territory. Summer turned to fall and the ranch prospered. More importantly, the family grew closer. The walls Jack had built around his heart came down bit by bit until the man who had once been so closed off was laughing at supper, playing with the children, holding Catherine close at night, and whispering words of love. Then in September, Catherine began to feel unwell. At first, she attributed it to exhaustion from the long, hot summer. But when the nausea continued and her monthly courses stopped, she knew she was pregnant. The realization filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had not even considered the possibility. They had been so focused on survival, on keeping the family together, that the idea of adding to it had never crossed her mind. She told Jack one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Shock, yes, but then wonder, then joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. A baby, he whispered, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. Our baby. Are you happy? Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Catherine, you've given me so much already. You've given me back my life, my heart, my hope. And now this. His voice broke. I never thought I'd have this chance again. They told Benjamin and Grace at supper, and both children reacted with enthusiasm that quickly turned to 100 questions. Where would the baby sleep? Would it be a boy or a girl? Could they help pick names as fall deepened into winter? Catherine's belly grew round with new life. Dr. Caldwell confirmed she was healthy, and the baby was developing well. The due date would be sometime in April, 1 year almost to the day since the custody hearing that had secured their family. Jack became almost comically overprotective, insisting Catherine rest, more refusing to let her do any heavy lifting, worrying over every twinge and ache. Catherine found it both endearing and exasperating. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, she told him one afternoon when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. I know, but I can't help worrying. I couldn't save Margaret. I couldn't save Lily. If something happened to you or the baby, Catherine set down the basket and took his face in her hands. Nothing is going to happen. I'm strong, the baby is healthy, and doctor. Caldwell says everything is progressing normally. You have to trust that. I'm trying. I know, and I love you for it. But Jack, you can't protect everyone from everything. Sometimes you have to have faith. Winter was mild that year, and by March, Catherine was enormous and counting down the days until the baby arrived. She had sewn tiny clothes, prepared a cradle that had once belonged to Lily, and tried to prepare herself mentally for the challenge ahead. Jack had done something unexpected. One evening in late March, he had taken Catherine by the hand and led her down the hallway to the room that had been locked since the day she arrived. Lily's room. I want to show you something, he said quietly and opened the door. The room had been transformed. The toys and little girl decorations were gone, packed away carefully in boxes that Jack said he would save for their child when they were older. In their place was a nursery painted in soft yellow with a rocking chair by the window and the cradle positioned where it would catch the morning light. I couldn't leave it as a shrine anymore, Jack said. It was time to let go. Lily will always be my daughter, always have a place in my heart. But this room belongs to the future now, to our baby. Catherine cried, hormones and emotion overwhelming her, and Jack held her gently, one hand on her swollen belly, where their child moved and kicked. The baby came on a warm April morning, the kind of day where the sky was impossibly blue and the world seemed full of promise. Catherine's labor started just after dawn, and Jack immediately sent Benjamin racing into town for Dr. Caldwell. The labor was long and difficult. Catherine had heard the stories, had known it would be painful, but nothing quite prepared her for the reality. For hours, she labored Jack at her side, holding her hand, murmuring encouragement, his face pale with worry. Dr. Caldwell arrived and took charge, his calm competence, a steady presence in the chaos. And finally, as the sun began to set on a day that had felt endless, Catherine gave one last push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world. A baby's cry. It's a boy, Dr. Caldwell announced, placing the squalling infant on Catherine's chest. A healthy baby boy. Catherine looked down at her son through tears of exhaustion and joy. He was perfect, tiny and red-faced and perfect. Jack leaned over them both, his own face wet with tears, and placed a gentle kiss on Catherine's forehead. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for this, for him, for everything. They named him James after Jack's father, with the middle name Thomas after Catherine's father. James Thomas Brennan came into the world surrounded by love, and in the days that followed, the entire household revolved around him. Benjamin was entranced by his baby brother, eager to help in any way he could. Grace appointed herself the official baby soother, singing him songs when he fussed and helping Catherine with diaper changes. And Jack was transformed. He held James for hours, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes, whispering promises about the life they would build together, about the ranch James would inherit someday, about being the father James deserved. One evening when James was 2 weeks old, Jack carried the baby to the window and stood looking out at the land he had worked so hard to keep. You see all this, little man, he said softly. This is your home, your legacy. Your mama and I fought for it. We nearly lost it more times than I can count. But we held on, and now it's yours. All of it. Catherine watched from the bed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and hard-won and precious beyond measure. The christening was held on a Sunday in May, with the whole town in attendance. Reverend Hayes performed the ceremony, his voice warm with joy, as he welcomed James Thomas Brennan into the church community. Benjamin and Grace stood as godparents, both children solemn and proud in their roles. After the service, there was a celebration at the ranch. Neighbors brought food and gifts, and the house was filled with laughter and music and warmth. Abigail Whitmore presented Catherine with the quilt she had made for the baby, each square lovingly stitched. As the sun began to set and guests started heading home, Catherine stood on the porch with James in her arms and surveyed her family. Benjamin was showing some of the neighbor children how to rope a fence post. Grace was collecting eggs from her chickens, explaining her business to anyone who would listen. And Jack was shaking hands with Reverend Hayes, thanking him for everything he had done for them. This was her life now, not the one she had imagined back in Boston when she was just a desperate woman with 2 children and no hope. Not the one she had expected when she stepped off that train in Redemption Creek and found herself stranded in a strange land. But it was hers, built from desperation and hope, from legal contracts that became real love, from strangers who became family. Jack came to stand beside her, his arms settling naturally around her waist. "What are you thinking about? How far we've come? How different everything is from what I expected." Better or worse? Catherine looked up at him, at this man who had saved her from a blizzard and then given her a home and a heart to call her own. So much better, better than I ever dreamed possible. Jack kissed her softly, then reached out to touch James's tiny hand. The baby's fingers closed around his father's, holding tight, and Catherine felt tears of pure happiness on her cheeks. Years later, when Benjamin was grown and running his own section of the ranch, when Grace's egg business had expanded into a thriving poultry operation that supplied half the territory, when James had been joined by two more children, a daughter named Margaret and a son named William, Catherine would sometimes stand on that same porch and remember. She would remember the girl who stepped off a train with nothing but hope and desperation. She would remember the cowboy who saved her from a blizzard and then from a life without love. She would remember every struggle, every tear, every moment of fear, and she would be grateful. Grateful for the hard times that had forged them into something stronger. Grateful for the second chances that life had given them both. Grateful for the family they had built from the ruins of loss and loneliness. Jack would find her there, gray threading through his dark hair, now lines of laughter around his eyes, and he would pull her close the way he had done 1,000 times before. "What are you thinking about?" he would ask, as he always did. And Catherine would smile and say, as she always said, "How lucky we are." Because they were, against all odds, against all expectations, they had found their way home. Not the home of blood and birthright, but the home of choice and commitment and love that refused to surrender. The home they had built together, one hard one day at a time. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.